Um, all right, let's go ahead and get to our last speaker, Jonathan Marshall. Um, we've gone through the process of talking about of introducing climate change and climate studies with Greg Jones. We moved into research and genetics research with Andy Walker, and into applied scenarios with Mark Greenspan and Randy Meyer, and then some solutions that we can provide at LaFour for your winemaking challenges. We moved on again with Tom Collins to give us a really cool update, and then had a great panel with Julian and Beth. And now we're going to finish everything up with another solution for how you can be involved and how you can offset your impact on the environment. So Jonathan Marshall, thank you so much for coming today. And if you would, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Daniel, and thank you all for hanging in there so long. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Well, as it says, I'm Jonathan Marshall. I'm the retired economics editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. I'm also the co-founder of the Economics Policy Network of Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a grassroots, nonpartisan organization dedicated to enacting effective national policies to curb the climate crisis. Today, I'm going to briefly introduce a concept called carbon fee and dividend. It's the cornerstone of several powerful climate bills pending in Congress, some with dozens of co-sponsors, and support from many conservatives as well as Democrats. Today, you've heard several informative presentations on what you as vintners can do to adapt to challenging climate changes. But if you want to stay in business and enjoy life as we know it, we all, you and all the rest of us, need to do more collectively. Without strong national policies to control greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels, nothing we do as individuals, as businesses, or even as a state will slow the oncoming climate crisis. Serious scenarios forecast possible warming of 4 or even 5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, which would make much of the Earth virtually uninhabitable, not to mention the devastating effects on your industry. To prevent such a catastrophe, we need to build political support at the national level for transformational investments in clean energy, while ensuring a fair and equitable transition to a low-carbon world. Here's a slight detour. According to public health experts, the single most powerful program ever devised to reduce lung cancer is the tax on tobacco, which discourages young people from getting hooked on cigarettes. Here you can see a direct inverse correlation, which numerous studies show is actually causal. The same idea applies to greenhouse gases. If you want to limit something bad, raise its price. A tax on greenhouse pollution is often called a carbon tax or carbon fee because carbon dioxide is the most prevalent climate warming gas. Led by Janet Yellen, the former chair of the Federal Reserve Board, nearly 3,600 US economists, including 27 Nobel laureates, have signed a statement declaring that a steadily rising carbon tax on fossil fuels is the most cost-effective lever to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed that is necessary. That's an unprecedented professional consensus. Perhaps surprisingly, polls show such a measure would have support from roughly 60% of American voters. It also has support from the California legislature, among other entities. Economists and other experts swear by carbon taxes because, unlike regulations, they cover all sectors of the economy, from heavy industry to households. And instead of imposing one-size-fits-all solutions, they use market incentives to harness the unique knowledge and motivation of every individual to lower their carbon footprint most cost-effectively. Here's what a new report from the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis had to say just a few days ago. Quote, When a ton of carbon pollution billows from a smokestack, no one pays for that pollution. As a result, industry, investors, and consumers have less incentive to choose less polluting products or technologies. Until the market reflects the true cost of carbon pollution, the US economy will remain biased toward fossil fuel combustion. It went on to explain that a fee or tax that raises the price of fossil fuels percolates through the entire economy, providing an incentive for all decision makers in the economy to look for ways to reduce emissions. Those ways are summarized here. They broadly include using energy more efficiently, substituting clean energy, like renewable electricity, for polluting energy, like diesel, and rapidly innovating better ways of achieving these ends. The good news is that carbon taxes really do work. Several dozen countries around the world, including Canada and the European Union, now tax greenhouse gas emissions. And they are getting results without harming their economies in the slightest. Since 1990, when Sweden imposed a carbon tax, the country's GDP has grown more than 80%, as fast as the United States, while slashing CO2 emissions by at least 25%. Today, Sweden emits only a quarter as much CO2 per dollar of GDP as the United States. The United States can and must follow their example. A total of 8 carbon pricing bills are currently pending in Congress. If national politicians have the will, we could have a carbon tax by 2021. Here's how it could work using the model of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which has 80 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives. Using existing administrative mechanisms in the IRS and Treasury Department, the tax would be placed on several thousand fossil fuel extractors or importers based on the expected CO2 pollution created by burning or using these fuels. These fossil fuel companies already pay excise taxes, so there'd be very little extra complexity. They would absorb some of the cost and pass the rest on to businesses and consumers, creating incentives for all of us to find cleaner alternatives. The tax would start low to avoid disruption, but rise over time. 10 years, it would amount to just over $100 per ton of CO2, which would amount to about $1 per gallon of gasoline. The revenue from this tax will eventually grow to several $100 billion a year. Instead of spending it, the government will return the money to every American in the form of an equal monthly check. This dividend will provide financial relief for households during the transition to a low-carbon world and build political support for the policy. By 2030, the annual dividend to a family of 4 will be about $3,500, enough to buy a lot of wine, I might add. Even a modest carbon tax can produce dramatic improvements, as shown by this projection by economists at Columbia University. The dots show the trend line in the reduction of net emissions over time to 2050. In fact, by 2050, the rising tax will largely wipe out the use of fossil fuels in our economy. It would lower US emissions enough to keep global temperatures within acceptable limits between 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade, if the rest of the world follows suit. And if we have time later, I'll be happy to discuss how this bill actually promotes such international cooperation. Carbon fees, I should add, can achieve even more when accompanied by smart regulations that target non-market sectors like methane pollution or carbon sequestration in soils. The carbon fee is what changes behavior to slow the climate crisis, but the dividend is critically important too. As I mentioned, it will help low and moderate income households an affordable transition from fossil fuels to cleaner energy. It also makes the carbon fee progressive and equitable, unlike many costly regulations. 2/3 of households would break even or come out ahead, the low and moderate income ones. Poor households have the most to gain. This from the Treasury analysis from 3 years ago. And as also mentioned, it will build long-term political support from the public and their elected followers. Hopefully all of this makes sense, but it won't happen without local will. That's where you come in. Last year, more than 1,500 volunteers from nearly 500 local chapters of Citizens Climate Lobby descended on the Capitol to lobby 529 members of Congress in support of carbon fee and dividend legislation. This was the largest one-day citizens lobbying event ever held in Washington. And partly as a result, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act now has 80 co-sponsors, including one brave Republican from Florida, whose state may soon be underwater. But the other bills have support too. You don't have to join CCL or endorse any one bill to make a difference. But your support for carbon fee and dividend as a centerpiece of any climate policy will be vital to getting Congress to move quickly next year on bipartisan legislation. I hope you will join us in this important cause. Well, thanks for your attention. Here are a couple of links that if you want to follow up either on one of the bills or the broader issue of carbon taxes that I recommend. There's, of course, lots more on the web, but here are two good places to start. And I would be happy to take any questions, time permits.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great, and this really helps us bring the big picture of the climate change webinar together, and having a good solution and having a solution that works and is backed by economists and environmentalists alike is really important. We had a question about the role of advocacy. So John Finn asked, what is the role of advocacy, such as carbon fee and dividend legislation? But I think he may have covered that. Do you want to speak a little bit more about advocacy?
Sure. This is, it's all important for us to act responsibly as individuals. The old saying, think globally, act locally. But as I've tried to show in this presentation, part of acting locally is to act politically. Because if we all lower our carbon footprint, I'm sorry to say that's worthy, but it's not going to do the job. We need to change the structure of incentives in the economy. That absolutely requires collective political action. And as individuals, as voters, as business owners, we have a real opportunity to influence our legislators. And I think a responsible action on this, both out of stewardship of the earth, but also out of self-interest, if we want to maintain our lives and businesses in the future, requires making our representatives in Congress know how important solutions like this are.
That graphic that you showed of teen smoking cessation and how you can affect the bad behavior by taxing it was a very telling study. And I like the way that dovetailed into the topic. So I don't see any more questions here. Sean Richardson, would you like to close up with a couple of words?
I can. I was not planning to, but I certainly.
Well, I thought it might be nice. I don't mean to put you on the spot. We've had a really informative day, and I just want to say thanks to everyone.
And that's exactly what I would say. Thank you for everyone. That was a great series of presentations. I really enjoyed every single one of those. It was a very nice flow from what you can do in the vineyard, what you can do in the winery, what we can do as a society, and that's what we're looking at. That's what we need to do.